Web Marketing That Works podcast, episode 58, with Gini Dietrich from SpinSucks.
Welcome to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Come behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments and listen in as amazing guests confess the truth about what really works. Now, here are your hosts, Adam Franklin and Toby Jenkins.
Hey, it's Adam Franklin here, and you are listening to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. And the guest today is Gini Dietrich from SpinSucks. Okay, so this is the show for people who love marketing on the web. You'll be taken behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments. We'll look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. There are some great confessions today from Gini Dietrich of what's failed and what has actually worked really, really well. So I look forward to sharing those with you in the show. But before we get there, this show is brought to you by our book called Web Marketing That Works, and specifically the bonus 33 free marketing templates that go with it. So if you would like to access those for free, head over to bluewiremedia.com.au/book, and they are all yours. Okay, so today's guest is Gini Dietrich, and as you'll discover in the show, I was actually introduced to her by Andy Crestodina, a very excellent content marketer from Chicago. He runs Orbit Media, and he mentioned Gini in one of our interviews we did a few years ago. Now, I've been following Gini ever since, and I was absolutely thrilled when we could finally coordinate a time between Chicago and Sydney, and she has obviously just been on the show. Now, the interview is coming up right now. So to give you an idea of who Gini is, she is the founder and CEO of Arment Dietrich, an integrated marketing communications firm. She's the author of the book SpinSucks, which I was reading late last year on my holiday to Bali. She is the co-author of the book Marketing in the Round and co-host of Inside PR. She's also the lead blogger at SpinSucks and the founder of SpinSucks Pro. I recommend you follow her blog, and let's get on with the show. So Gini Dietrich, welcome to Web Marketing That Works. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here, mostly because I get to listen to your accent.
Well, I guess we do sound a little bit different.
We do.
I was over your way the other year and got introduced to Andy Crestodina from Orbit Media, and then I interviewed him last year, and he spoke very, very highly of you and your blog and your business. So it's a great thrill to have you on the show. I gather that you spoke at his Content Jam event.
I did indeed, and he's a very good friend, so I probably owe him cake or something for saying nice things about me.
Well, I want to kick the podcast off, Gini, and ask you to give me a brief overview of your business at the moment.
Sure. You know, I grew up in the traditional PR firm world, so I was very accustomed to doing things like media relations and events and, reputation management and things that aren't very tangible, which is how I built my PR firm because that's what I knew. And in 2010, I decided that there probably was some big change coming, especially with this thing called Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, and Google Plus didn't exist quite yet back then, but, there were all these changes coming. So I sort of remodeled my agency, so to speak, and today we follow what we call the peso model. So today we do paid, earned, shared, and owned media. So a little bit of advertising, not like Super Bowl ads or anything like that, but social media advertising, pay-per-click, that kind of stuff. Earned, which is media relations. Shared, of course, is social, and owned is content. So that's how we've sort of evolved from the traditional side to more digital.
And I was reading on your blog, Gini, that a few years ago, you tell me, but you walked into your office one day and you realized there was one person sitting there and you thought, well, we're paying all this money in rent and everybody's working outside the office. And that caused a fairly big change, didn't it?
It did. We're paying a lot of money to have an office in downtown Chicago. The rent is not exactly cheap there. I had been traveling for a few days and I walked in at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the only person sitting there in our 30-person office suite was my assistant. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Why am I spending this kind of money when nobody's here all the time? So yeah, we went virtual in November of 2011. And the idea was just to do it for a year. Mm-hmm. And after about 10 months, I said to everybody, okay, are you ready to start looking for office space again? And nobody would look me in the eye. Everybody got quiet. And I said, do you want to stay virtual? And they all said, yes. So here we are, 3 years later, completely virtual.
That's fantastic. Because when I read that, it was just so enlightening for me, because I was going through something fairly similar just like probably 18 months ago, but our hand was forced because our landlord was selling the building. And my business partner and I thought, well, pretty much I lived in Sydney, Toby lived in Sydney, but our office was in Brisbane, which is 1,000 kilometres away. And our staff at the time, they could work remotely themselves as well. And very often, there'd just be one person in the office, and she was getting often very lonely. And so when the time came, we were in the same boat. It's like, well, this is forcing our hand to go remote, fully remote, and not have any office at all. And we haven't looked back. It's just been fantastic. So I gather your team's spread across America and beyond those borders?
North America. So,
North America, yep.
Yeah, the U.S. and Canada, yep.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
I will tell you, though, that our 10-year goal is to have 60 employees scattered across all of the English-speaking countries. So we'll get there eventually.
Including Australia?
Including Australia.
You'll have to work on your accents, Ginny.
I know.
Now, what's your philosophy for web marketing?
I really believe it's about relationships, and we're building relationships just like we do in person. We're doing it behind the computer screen. And part of what I think everybody expects is this silver bullet of, oh my gosh, now I can talk to 1,000 people on Twitter so I can build all these relationships and suddenly my business is going to boom. And we forget that we're still building trust and relationships with human beings, and that takes time. So that's where we focus a lot of our time, is on that relationship piece of it and how those relationships can help you build your business, sell books, whatever your goals are, that help you do that because you've built trust with human beings.
And it's a long, slow game, the old relationship building, isn't it?
It is. It's a very long, slow game. People will say, I do a lot of speaking, and people will say, well, you're doing this and this and this and this. And so I have to take a step back and remind them that when I started all of this in 2006, I wasn't doing all that. We started out blogging, and then we added Twitter, and then we added Facebook, and then we added YouTube, then we added LinkedIn. Over the last almost 9 years, you start to add things. And so it's been a very long process to get there. It's not like we went out and we were like, okay, well, now we're going to do all these things and we're going to do it all at once. That's not the way it works.
And so they're all like building blocks, right? You can't sort of do everything at once. You pick what is most relevant to you at the time and then put that into place and slowly put the other pieces and build on top of that. Has that been your approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you a great example. I was meeting with a friend last week, and he says to me, I really want to get on Twitter and, this and this and this. And I said to him, but why? And he goes, well, because I think it's really compelling and I think all of my prospects are there. And he's going through this thing. And I said, all right, let's do a test. I pulled my laptop out and got on Twitter, and I said, give me a few names of prospects. And so he did. Nobody's on Twitter now. So we went through 30 names, and only 3 people were on Twitter. But all 30 were on LinkedIn. So I said, okay, why would you spend your time on Twitter when only 10% of your prospects are there, when 100% of your prospects are on LinkedIn? And he kind of looked at me and was like, I hate it when you're right. But that's the point, is spend the time where the people you need to connect with are already spending time, and then build it on top of that from there.
That's such a good point. Now, Ginny, part 2 of the podcast is where I like to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. And
sure.
Let's start with the good. What's worked really well for you and your business?
Blogging, hands down. It drives about 80% of our revenue. So it has been huge for us.
Okay, and you've been blogging, since day one in 2006, or is that something that was a building block further down the track?
We started in September of 2006, so almost from day one.
Early days, okay. And so is that for you and your team, for the listeners, is that like a daily thing that you do? Is that a weekly thing? Does everybody in your team contribute, or is it you driving it, or how's it evolved over the years?
I blog every single day, and then people from my team blog twice a week, and then we have guest bloggers the other day. So we publish 10 times a week.
Okay.
So we have 3 guest bloggers, and then 2 team, and then me every day.
And then was there a point in your blogging journey where you sort of broke through, where you got that traction? Because I know I have certainly struggled over the years, and a lot of my clients have said, it's so bloody hard, this blogging thing. You do all this work up front and you don't see any results. How long do you push through, or what have you got to do to break through? So, I mean, you've got a fantastic domain authority. You've got huge amounts of social shares and comments happening on your blog. Has there been a turning point for you?
It took 3 years.
Yep.
I mean, and when I look back at it, I don't really know why we kept doing it because it took so long. I'm glad we did, but as a business owner, you sort of look at that and go, why did you continue doing something that didn't work for 3 years?
And it really does take a huge amount of time, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, I spent 15 hours last week, but I was catching up from the holidays, so I probably spend 10 hours a week on it.
And then it's your blog predominantly as well that drives those those 30,000 plus email subscribers that you've got?
Yep.
Yeah, wow. Okay, fantastic. That is good to hear, because I often tell clients it's like exercising, you should get up every day and do some exercise and eat well.
Yep.
Just like blogging, you should get up and write a blog post and promote it and everything else, but it takes time and it's hard work, and other things often jump into that urgent category, whereas the important stuff is that content creation and that publishing your thoughts and being generous with what you know. So it's really pleasing to hear that it actually has had such huge impact for you, like 80% of your revenue coming from your blog is
it's pretty big.
A huge reason to be blogging. Okay, so the blog's worked really well. What hasn't worked so well, Gini?
Hiring people. I'm really bad at that.
Mm-hmm.
From a marketing perspective?
Oh, marketing or business perspective? Both are good.
Business, I would say business for sure is hiring people. I am just not good at it. I've certainly gotten better over the years, but man, if somebody could take that off my plate, that'd be great.
Yeah.
It's a struggle, finding the right people. And when you own the business, as you well know, it's hard to find people who are as passionate and compelled to succeed as you are and put in the same time and energy and all that. So it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah. Now, I was reading on your blog a while ago that as a business, I think you said you were experimenting with information products and events and inbound marketing. So you've tried all these different types of marketing and I guess sales or product, and you found that certain ones work well for you and certain ones haven't, and you've stuck with this agency model of having clients. Is that the case?
I think it was 2004. Yeah, it was probably late 2011 that we decided we would create a site that provided professional development for PR pros and would charge for it. So it would be a monthly subscription, and they would get online education and training, to help them move along in their careers. What we discovered is that even though people say they want professional development, they don't really want to do it, and nobody's willing to pay for it. So that was a big bomb. And it's interesting, when my first book, Marketing the Round, came out in 2012, because I'd given so much content away to that point, the number of people that asked me for the book for free was astonishing.
Is that right?
I was like, guys, I was like, it's $20. Spend the $20. But because they were so accustomed to getting so much for free from us, they couldn't fathom spending the $20.
Oh, wow. Despite having got 3 or 4 years worth of free, awesome content on your blog, and you've been so generous. Wow, that's really interesting. And so is SpinSucks Pro, is that your information professional development part, or is that a new product that you've got?
That's the information training. So it's evolved now into mostly webinars and podcasts.
Yep.
And we give it all for free.
Okay, now the final part of the good, the bad, the ugly is the ugly. Are there any confessions that you'd like to make as to any dead set shockers you've had? And I guess one of the angles that I'd like to go here is, particularly you spoke earlier about press releases and blogger outreach and forming relationships, one person at a time. So first part of the question is, any dead set shockers that you want to confess to? And if not, then can you talk us through some of the really bad and also really good techniques for reaching out to people with press releases and blogger outreach?
Okay, so I'll attack that from 2 points. So, yes, the ugly part is when we started blogging, it was horrendous. I mean, embarrassingly so. And I publish our first blog post on our anniversary every year just so that people can see that you have to start somewhere. I mean, no links, no categorizing. I don't even think this is what we did. If we read something in the paper or in one of the trades or something that we found compelling, we didn't link to it. We put an asterisk at the bottom that said, read such and such in PRSA Tactics. I mean, it was
like a uni assignment.
Yeah, it was terrible. It was terrible. So, yes, from an ugly perspective, that first year, it was bad. Bad. So, I use that as an example just so that people understand that you just have to keep with it and you get better as time goes. Trust me.
And it's right. The more the practice, the more you do it, the better you become, right? And everybody has pretty hideous starting points, and it's amazing to see how far you can evolve in a few years.
It is pretty amazing. On the PR sort of approaching influencers or journalists or bloggers piece of it, I was helping a young professional with some of this last week. She reached out to me and she said, I'm kind of struggling with this. Nobody in my agency does PR. We're an advertising agency. I feel like I'm pitching correctly. Would you mind looking at some of my pitches for me? And so I did. And she's doing some of the right things in that she's reading, some of the big publications that she wants to reach are like Time and Newsweek and the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, fairly well-known publications. So she's reading those journalists' columns or articles, and she's picking out pieces of them that would fit her clients. And in her email introduction, she's saying, I read your article on such and such, loved your take on this, or actually have a different take on it. So she makes that piece of it human. The biggest mistake she was making was she was including links and articles and attachments that the journalists would then have to read to decide whether or not they were going to do a story. So essentially she's asking them to do too much work in order to get her client featured. So the recommendations that I've given to her, and I will repeat them here because I think they work, is yes, absolutely find something that you have in common. If you can comment on articles or blog posts, that's even better because that does two things. One, even if the blogger isn't or a journalist isn't responding to comments, he or she actually reads those to see, is there a different viewpoint or should I be considering something else? And somebody who can leave a really compelling argument or comment versus that was great or you're an idiot, if they can leave something compelling, then it starts to build a relationship with that journalist or blogger. So do that. Make it super easy. So if your business is software as a service, for instance, and you think that you have the newest thing to help small businesses do their own content without a lot of hassle, then you would say in the email, loved your take on content marketing in your blog post on Tuesday. Totally agree with you, but also think there's a piece to it missing, and that's how small business owners can do this without a lot of the hassle of spending 10 hours a week. I have more information if you're interested. So it's not asking them to do any work or click on any links or open any attachments. It's just saying, I have a different take on this. So really personalize it for that person that you're pitching versus sending out the same pitch to everybody, which most people do, and it's really irritating.
And I presume social media plays a fairly big part in actually strengthening those relationships with the journalists and with the bloggers before you actually need to ask for anything?
Yeah, I mean, if you can find those, especially on Twitter, if you can find journalists and bloggers on Twitter because that's open and you don't have to have a friend invite or anything like that, find those people, create a list in Hootsuite and keep that list open so that when one of your influencers tweets something, you can say, retweet it or start a conversation. That was really compelling. I liked your piece on that. And then that keeps it's an easy way to keep updated on what those people are doing as well.
You talk more about this in detail in Chapter 5 of Spin Sucks, your book, and one of the points that you make is lose the idea of control. So talk me through that.
So the idea is that It used to be if we were upset with a product or a service or a company, we might be so upset that we would write a letter to the CEO. And if the company was progressive enough, they might send you a form letter back from the CEO that has his or her signature, and that's it. You would tell a handful of people, you'd tell your friends, you'd tell your family, you might tell your neighbors, and that's as far as it would go. So we always had the perception that we had control because we never heard, unless somebody was so angry that they would actually sit down and write a letter. We never heard if somebody was unhappy. We never heard if somebody was happy. We didn't have those conversations. So we had this perception that we were in control of the message, that we were in control of what people thought. And social, of course, has turned that upside down because now anytime anybody says anything about any organization, we all hear about it. And so people feel like they've lost control when in fact they've not lost control. They just have access to the information now.
Whereas before they were never actually hearing it directly.
Right.
Okay, thank you. So, Gini, if you were starting your business from scratch, knowing what you know, of course, what would you do first?
I would not name my business Arment Dietrich.
Is that because it's too hard to spell or too hard to pronounce or what?
Because my name is on the door, the proverbial door, which means every client expects me to do their work.
Okay.
Which, of course, is not scalable.
That's not, no.
I probably would create a product versus a service because a service requires people's time, and time is hard to scale. There's a lot of things. I would learn things like, cash flow and profit and loss sheets and all those kinds of things that I had no idea about when I started the business.
But you learn pretty quickly, right? There are necessary evils to know.
You learn really quickly, yeah.
And what's next on the marketing front for you?
I'm embarrassed to admit this, but we don't do any formal email marketing other than the blog because, time, and we're doing it for clients, and so the shoemaker's children doesn't have shoes. So that's one of our big initiatives this year is a big inbound marketing program.
Oh, cool. Okay, now let's deep dive into one area, and the question for you is, which specific web marketing activity brings you the most joy and why?
I love blogging. I was an English major. It was with a creative writing bent, so I wrote all the way through college. Fiction, of course, not business writing, but I've always had that love, and so for me, and that probably is why blogging is so effective for us because you can tell I love it. I don't dread sitting down and writing a blog post. I love it. So I think that's probably why it's been so powerful for us.
And have you got a novel in you, do you reckon, Gini?
I do. Someday.
It's happening?
Someday.
Cool. Could you take us through your actual blogging process, I guess?
Sure. I wake up at 4:45 and I feed and walk Jack Bauer, the dog. And then I sit down at my desk at 5, and that's when I do my writing. So I usually spend about an hour and a half writing, researching, doing all that, getting everything ready for publication. I do schedule some social media updates just around that piece of content and get all that done. And then by 7, I'm done with that and start the rest of my day.
Wow. Have you got a really effective, pro tip for the super advanced listeners on the show?
Yes. I would say, let's talk influencer relations from a pro tip perspective.
Okay.
When you are using content to drive engagement and social shares and revenue and all of that kind of stuff, also think about how influencers can help you with that. So use tools like Follower Wonk or InkyBee to figure out who's writing about the same topic and either link to the content that they're writing about or CC them on a tweet when you tweet your own content and bring them into that conversation. Speaking of Andy Cristodina, they, on their blog, once a month, I think they do, 6 questions with 6 experts, and it brings in 6 influencers onto their blog to answer a question. And so then, of course, those 6 influencers share their content. So I would take that even a step further and start linking to those influencers' content so then there's that quid pro quo where they're back and forth and you get the valuable link and all that. I think a lot of marketers in general miss that piece.
that is very powerful, not only from the influencer sharing your content, right, but the backlink and the SEO benefit of that as well.
Yep.
Okay, here's a question I've been very keen to ask you, because you're so heavily involved in the blogging world and also the PR world. If you could choose just blogger outreach, like you've spoken about getting backlinks and interacting with bloggers, versus journalists and getting mainstream press mentions, which would you go for?
Whoa, gosh, it's hard to say. I hate to say
pros and cons for each. Oh, yeah, sorry, carry on. I'll be quiet.
I think it depends. For us, because we've created our domain authority is fairly high. I think we're 73 or 74 now.
It's huge.
For us, mainstream publications are next because they're the ones with the 90 and higher. So we have to have the ever valuable backlink from them. A blogger that's at 30 or 40. Well, I like those relationships and want to continue building those relationships, so a lot of them are my friends. That doesn't do anything for us from an SEO perspective. So I would say, if your domain authority is in the 20 to 40 range, that you should be focused on bloggers. If your domain authority is higher than 60, then you should be focused on mainstream media.
Okay. And then how about the difference between, I guess, forming relationships with journalists versus trying to become a guest contributor for some of those press publications?
Boy, you know what? Most of them take contributed content. I would try that first every time because you can control the message and you can control whether or not there's a link to your site.
Yep. Awesome. So, Ginny, who do you learn from?
We've already mentioned Andy, so I guess we should not include him. But I learned a ton
He's fantastic,
from him.
Hey? I've learned a lot from him.
He's so smart.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, there's so many people. I would say right now probably is Christopher Penn at Shift Communications.
Okay. And what do you like about his work?
He's very nerdy.
Mm-hmm.
He's very, very, very analytical. So one of the things he's writing about right now is how to figure out your specific niche for how people share your content and the analytics to prove that. And so he walks you it's like science, analytics, math, deep stuff. And I love that because it's not something that I'm an expert in, but I'm really compelled by it. So I love absorbing all of that and figuring out how to use analytics and data to better my content.
And I think content is such a balance between the art of actually the storytelling side of it and then the science of the analytics and the traffic and the SEO and all these other factors. Hey, it's a fascinating area to be in.
It is. And, it's funny because obviously, based on my ugly story earlier, we didn't spend any time on the science in the beginning. And it was just, put a blog post up and that was it. We're more sophisticated about it. I wouldn't say we're where we should be, but we're more sophisticated about that balance now. If I'm overly tired and don't really want to write a blog post at 5 o'clock in the morning, I may just throw something up there that's not really well thought through in terms of the science side of things. So, there's a balance on that too.
And what are the sort of things you do? Like, do you do your keyword research and check out the competition in terms of, through the Google Planner tool and look at a headline that is proving to be popular, like in BuzzSumo? What sort of things do you look for?
All of the above. During the holidays, one of the guest posts, the keyword that they used was Christmas. I was like, we can't compete for this.
That's a pretty popular keyword, right?
It's a pretty popular, yeah. So, I went in and kind of dug through to figure out how we could include Christmas in it, but that wasn't the keyword. So we ended up with a phrase that worked.
So not number one for Christmas yet?
No, not yet.
Okay.
We're working on it, though.
I bet. So, Ginny, have you got any closing thoughts or final pieces of advice for our listeners?
Yes, I will go back to the beginning in terms of building relationships. And really, to your point, remember that it is a slow process. The analogy I use in the book is that it's a marathon, not a sprint. You're going to go out, you're going to run the race for a really long time, you're going to hit the wall a few times, you're going to have to get your strength back up, you're going to have to mentally get through it, but you will get through it.
And just on the relationship building side, how do you go about handling the rejection? Because surely if you're reaching out to journalists and bloggers and people in your industry, there's got to be times when there are no's and they don't just welcome you in with open arms. How do you handle that?
I think you have to do two things. One, you have to think about it from the perspective of it's not personal, it's business. You know, what may be compelling or interesting to you may not be to them or important to them at the time. And then we always take a look at, okay, if we're getting so many no's, what can we tweak to get the yes? So we use it as research, sort of like A/B testing you do online. You sort of do that with relationship building as well.
A learning opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And finally, how can listeners connect with you, Ginny?
The best place is spinsucks.com.
Fantastic. Well, I shall link to that in the show notes and also to your wonderful book called Spin Sucks, which I was reading on my holiday in Bali late last year. So fantastic read. And it's
I hope you were reading it with a cocktail.
Very often with a bintang, I must say, post-surf. So, no, fantastic read. Thanks for sharing everything that you do, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
All right, bye. So that wraps up my interview with Gini Dietrich. I really enjoyed that. I saw quite a few similarities, I guess, with our respective journeys, and that turning up to an office and finding one person sitting in there but paying all this rent, and then moving to that distributed remote model, which certainly has been really well received at our company, Blue Wire Media. You know, as I said in the interview, a lot of us have been working remotely for many years, and now our team's spread across Australia and across the world. So interesting that Ginny had a similar experience. I was really impressed by Ginny's blogging efforts, getting up at 4:45 in the morning to punch out a blog post until, till 6 or 7 o'clock, and then getting into her day. I certainly think that blogging is an area that Tobes and I will be focusing on, particularly this year in 2015. And then again, also Ginny's fantastic blogger, but she also admitted that email marketing was something that she did loads of for her clients, but was yet to start for herself. So she's starting that in 2015 as another building block in her web marketing asset. So it goes to show that no matter how far you are along in this marketing journey, there's always new components to be adding in, but it's not a rush. As she said at the start, she started with a blog and then added on Twitter and added on all these different social platforms. And that's exactly the approach that I take and that I advise clients and listeners to take. If you try to do everything at once, you'll get completely overwhelmed. But if you pick one that really appeals to you, and as Ginny said, it certainly makes sense if you pick ones that your clients or potential customers are actually using. I hear an example of advising a client not to go on Twitter because they could only find 3 of their 30 prospects, whereas all 30 of them were on LinkedIn. So a little bit of basic research at the start can really help inform where to focus your efforts, and understand that it is a long-term game. Blue Wire recently turned 10 years old, and Ginny was saying that her business is 9 years old. It started in 2006, and there's still components that we're both adding into our marketing assets. So certainly don't get overwhelmed, and just pick one, stick with it, and gradually add new things in as you go. So this show was brought to you by our book called Web Marketing That Works, and specifically the bonus 33 free marketing templates that go with it. If you'd like to get your hands on those, they're all yours. Head to bluewiremedia.com.au/book. Now, our intent with these podcasts is to deliver actionable advice, so your feedback and questions are always welcome. You can access me at adam.franklin@bluewiremedia.com.au, or simply tweet me at Franklin_Adam. Now, if you enjoyed the show, and I hope you did, I would love it if you could take the time to leave us an honest review on iTunes. It certainly helps raise our visibility in iTunes so that we can continue to get interesting guests like Ginny on the show. So thank you for listening through to the end, and see you next time.